The final formal paper in this symposium is a Kentucky Adena case study by Dr. Andrew Seidel from Arizona State University. The study shows how non-Western ontological concepts, specifically the inclusion of other than human beings in the category of the social person, help us to question and qualify archaeologists' Western bias in seeing burial mounds as territorial markers. The title of Dr. Seidel's paper is Persons and Places, Ontology and Landscape Use Among Kentucky Adena Groups.
Good evening, and thank you for your interest in this symposium. In this presentation, I hope to demonstrate that thinking about the ontological concerns of past societies has relevance for more than the interpretation of mortuary contexts and ritual deposits. I contend that archaeological research can benefit from taking non-Western ontologies seriously, recognizing that they affect how human groups perceived and responded to their environment, and using them to generate testable hypotheses concerning past behavior. To support this argument, I begin with a brief discussion of personhood and how it relates to the structure of networks of social interaction. Then, I provide examples of how non-Western conceptions of personhood affect the ways in which people engage with features of their environment, as well as create situations in which aspects of identity can be derived from specific places. Following this, I use these insights to challenge the interpretation of Adena mounds as having been implicated in territorial behavior. I then offer some concluding remarks. With the rise of ontological anthropology and the variety of theoretical perspectives that have been brought to bear on associated topics, I want to clarify what I mean when I use the words person or personhood. Here, I define person as any entity that can intentionally engage in reciprocal social relationships. Personhood, for my purposes, is defined simply as the status of being a person. Defined as a status, personhood can be either ascribed or achieved. Ascribed personhood characterizes much of modern Western society and archaeological thought, where the categories of person and human are basically identical. Moreover, personhood is actively denied to animals, plants, features of the environment, etc. In an ontology in which personhood is ascribed, personhood is confined to a single class of being, but is inherent in every individual belonging to that class. In contrast, achieved personhood emerges through mutual engagement. As such, its distribution is both more dispersed and less even than that of ascribed personhood. An anecdote from the work of Halliwell among the Barons River Ojibwa provides a relevant example. Intrigued by the fact that stone is an animate noun in the Ojibwa language, Halliwell asked his informant whether all stones were alive. His informant responded, "No, but some are." The deciding factor for whether any particular thing can be considered a person is experience. That is, whether or not the thing in question has ever participated in a social relationship with a human. Halliwell refers to such entities as other than human persons, and these can take many forms, including animals, plants, material objects, non-corporeal entities, deceased human beings, natural phenomena, and even features of the landscape. Streams, caves, mountains, graves, ceremonial locations, and many other features of the physical environment are frequently associated with other than human persons within indigenous communities. As such, permissible behavior at such places is often determined by the social obligations that exist between humans and such spatially anchored other than human persons. Violation of such obligations is perceived to potentially result in injury, illness, drought, famine, or death. Because of this potential for catastrophic consequences, access to such places may be conditioned on the knowledge of how to maintain proper social relations with other than human persons there in order to avoid unintentional transgressions and consequent retribution. In ontologies in which personhood emerges from and is maintained by engaging in social relations, aspects of group identity can become derived from place. Fowles points out that movement to a new area requires the severance of some relations and the creation of new ones, thereby altering identity. There are ethnographic examples in which a human group moving into a new area takes on aspects of shared identity with previous occupants by means of participation in the same spatially anchored networks of social relationships. Among certain Australian Aboriginal groups, a region's abandonment requires a new group of humans to occupy the area and perform the same ceremonies to ensure fertility and the continued availability of water. Several North American indigenous societies, including the Mi'kmaq, Haudenosaunee, Wampanoag, and Zuni, have also expressed that engaging in situated practices creates a common identity between occupants of an area, both past and present. The linkage between identity and place can therefore remain intact despite significant changes in the composition of the occupying group. Ontologies in which personhood is an achieved status can therefore produce situations in which access to certain areas is seemingly controlled, and where specific group identities are continuously associated with specific places. Superficially, this looks like classic descriptions of territoriality, in which human groups establish and maintain exclusive access to land and the resources that it provides. Characterizing such systems as territorial, however, hides the social dynamics of the situation. When viewed diachronically, it becomes clear that places can be engaged with by multiple human groups, both simultaneously and sequentially. Archaeological interpretations of territorial behavior may therefore be oversimplifying or even mischaracterizing past social interactions. When we take non-Western ontologies seriously, territoriality becomes a hypothesis that should be tested rather than a condition to be assumed. I illustrate this point using data derived from a series of Adena mounds in northern Kentucky. Adena is currently considered to represent a mortuary program practiced throughout the Ohio Valley between approximately 500 BCE and 200 CE that was shared between multiple distinct social groups and characterized by local variations on common themes. Due primarily to being places of burial and following the Sachs-Goldstein hypothesis, Adena mounds have often been interpreted as indicating territoriality on the part of their builders. Such interpretations implicitly rely on an assumption of sedentism, and thus may not be valid in Kentucky, where available evidence suggests that Adena populations were characterized by short-term occupations and relatively high mobility. When the fact that many mounds exhibit evidence of discontinuous construction and lengthy periods of dormancy is also considered, the interpretation of Adena mound construction as associated with territorial behavior becomes open to question. If Adena mounds were expressions of territoriality, then, following the Sachs-Goldstein hypothesis, they likely resulted from the actions of a single descent-based corporate group. As such, as the top half of this figure shows, the burial population within any given mound should represent a subset of the biological lineages present in the region. Therefore, the amount of biological variation within a mound's burial population should be less than the amount of biological variation exhibited by a regional burial population. In contrast, as depicted in the bottom half of the slide, if multiple descent-based corporate groups contributed to a mound's construction, either simultaneously or sequentially, then the amount of biological variability exhibited by the mound's burial population could be expected to be comparable to the amount of biological variability in the regional burial population. To explore these different possibilities, I constructed a regional burial sample using skeletal remains derived from 8 Adena mounds and curated at the University of Kentucky's William S. Webb Museum of Anthropology. Using phenotypic variability as a proxy for biological variability, I recorded buccolingual and mesiodistal cervical diameters of the dentition. After reducing the dimensionality of the data using principal components analysis, phenotypic variability was quantified by measuring the dispersion of a mound's burial sample within the reduced data space using centroid size. To accommodate the small sample sizes involved, I used resampling techniques with 1,000 iterations to calculate a 95% confidence interval for centroid size. In order to determine if mound-level phenotypic variability was significantly lower than regional phenotypic variability, I then compared this interval to an average centroid size calculated from 1,000 random samples of the regional burial population. Given available sample sizes, mound-to-region comparisons were only possible for 4 mounds. The results are shown here. Purple bars represent the 95% confidence interval for the centroid size of each mound's burial sample. Black lines represent the average centroid size for the region. These values were calculated using random samples of equivalent size to the burial population derived from the mound in each comparison, and so vary with sample size. For Robbins, Ricketts, and Wright, phenotypic variability of the mound burial population is on par with regional phenotypic variability, suggesting that multiple groups likely participated in the construction of these mounds over time. Although not depicted or discussed in detail here, phenotypic variability comparisons were also made between a mound's entire burial sample and subsamples derived from individual episodes of mound construction. These finer scale comparisons indicate that multiple groups interred their dead within mounds simultaneously. For both Robbins and Wright, the number of groups participating in mound construction likely fluctuated over time. It should be noted that while phenotypic variability can be viewed as a proxy measure for the relative number of biological lineages interring their dead within a mound, it cannot track the participation of specific lineages in mound construction over time, or how such participation changed. In contrast to these results, the phenotypic variability of the burial population from Dover is significantly less than that recorded for the region, suggesting that only a subset of the regional population interred their dead within this mound during its construction. These results suggest that mound building among Kentucky Adena groups was a variable process, having often, but not always, been a collaborative project involving the efforts and interment of members of multiple descent-based corporate groups. This aligns well with interpretations of mound construction offered by Clay and Seaman, as well as alliance models such as those proposed by Carr for the Scioto Hopewell. Returning the discussion to ontological concerns, if we can assume that Adena groups perceived the dead to be persons, and to participate in ongoing social relations with living humans, then mound construction created places where social interaction with the dead could be reliably undertaken. It seems possible that, by interring their deceased members within the same mound, multiple corporate groups established ties to the same place. Through perpetuating social relationships with their dead at a shared place, corporate groups may then have taken on aspects of shared identity. The creation, transformation, and dissolution of such shared aspects of identity may thus provide the underlying rationale for Adena mound construction, alteration, and abandonment. As the results from Dover suggest, however, not all mound construction involved the participation of multiple groups. By allowing for the possibility that mound building was a cooperative endeavor, an ontological model for mound building accommodates aspects of Adena archaeology that sit uneasily within a territorial framework, such as the tension between local variability and broad-scale similarities in mound structure and mortuary practices, or the variation in the apparent tempo of mound construction. At the very least, consideration of ontology illustrated how non-Western conceptions of personhood can affect how humans perceive and engage with their environment, thereby stimulating a critical reconsideration of whether Adena mounds were implicated in territorial behavior. In doing so, it provided new insights into the range of social dynamics that can be associated with mound construction. Regardless of your interest in Adena archaeology, I hope that I have demonstrated that taking indigenous ontologies seriously enables us to think about our research in new ways, to ask new questions, and to achieve a more nuanced understanding of the past.